I'm going to take a slightly different approach. What I don't want to do is repeat things that mostly I've agreed with from colleagues at Cisco and SAP. But I'm going to take a slightly different view, and I'll try and be brief so we have time for questions. Following the question, I don't know if anyone's heard of IBM. If SAP is, but what people don't know is IBM employs nearly 100,000 people in Europe. We have 25 data centers here, a lot of software development. So it's a misnomer to think of us as just a US company. Now, several topics I want to start on. First, where we are with the NIS directive. And the fantastic work that Pilar and the ITRA committee have performed. I think we all need to raise our glass and thank her for So I propose a Christmas toast to Pilar. Thank you very much. You've done a really stunning job. If you look at where the NIS directive was when it leaked a year ago, when we first saw it, and where it is now, it's a huge. Certainly in the amendments, it's a very different animal. And then I'd like to speak a little bit about the future. So in agreeing with what Chris said earlier, the ITRA compromise amendments are a huge. I mean, it's a really big success. Having spoken, I didn't know all the background as to what. From Miguel told me what could have been introduced. But having said that, the cloud compromise amendment 7, having cloud services used, is problematic. And I know that this is not the end result, but from our perspective, I think the main thing is you don't focus on technology but on criticality. And what is critical is really down to the business and the processes they operate. It's not about the technology. It's much more productive than to look at the risks, the risk landscape primarily. Whether it's cloud or not really bears. Is relatively unimportant. And I'll introduce an anecdote. Well, it's not an anecdote; it's a true story as to where cloud might be considered as in scope. And this would be financial services critical infrastructure. It was a story in the Telegraph yesterday, where J.P. Morgan decided to ban their staff from instant messaging. I don't know whether this is broken in Europe, but the principle was this would have been a cloud service deployed, I think, by Bloomberg within J.P. Morgan's network. And I'm quoting, there's a clampdown on chats used across the industry by bankers who are involved in rigging LIBOR and currency exchange rates. So this is a classic case where a cloud service that could have been innocuous because it's chat that we all use this increasingly instead of email. It's instantaneous. It's you can get, certainly within my organisation, people use this more and more, but the issue there is, of course, if you're using online chats and you're rigging exchange rates, it's what is recorded and what's not recorded is difficult. And I'm just reporting what's in the papers. But this, that some of the chat rooms were called the Bandits Club, the Dream Team, and so on. And there was a lot of exaggerations, a lot of chat, but these led to things not going in the right direction. But this is just an indication of how, if you categorize technology per se, you really have to look at the risks themselves and what comes out of this, how technology is applied. So, second, just going on from that, where do we go from here? I think everyone agrees, and Thomas particularly, in your ENISA high-level event last week, I think gave an excellent analysis as where we are. It's very unlikely, mathematically perhaps, but very unlikely to get through under the current Parliament. And the position, we all know the position in Council is pretty uncertain. There's a lot of disagreement about the right balance. So we're really talking about end of 2014, 2015, the different scenarios. Will the Italians push it close enough to fruition? So I think the Latvians then kick it through, to use a footballing or what's going to happen to the dossier in the sort of limbo period? Will there still be agreement at Council? What is the constellation of the Commission? Is the new Commission still going to be in the same shape as it is now? And is the legal base still, harmonisation still appropriate? Lots of questions. But I'd like to take a sort of a somewhat different approach to saying, well, let's look at what else is happening. It's not true that we're in a catastrophic state if this directive doesn't get through. There are lots of good things happening. The Commission has launched the NIST platform, which had a very successful plenary meeting last week, and there are 3 streams there, one of which is developing a European sort of risk management approach, a common risk management approach. Also developing sector-specific information sharing platforms. These are proven ways to increase resilience. A common risk management approach would be incredibly useful, and there's no doubt when you speak to industry experts, the first thing that you want to motivate people to do is to share information across sectors, because you're something like 70% less vulnerable if you share than if you don't share. That was a statistic from the financial services sector. So rather than having a top-down sort of government-mandated approach, which is going to be difficult to take along, whether that comes about or not, but there is a possibility to advance more quickly with a voluntary scheme with exceptionally strong incentives. Now, if you take the first working group of the NIST platform and you had a common risk management framework for Europe, that could actually quite quickly become a sort of minimum standard of care for organisations. Although it's not mandatory, such a framework would be an extremely strong incentive. And the reasons why, in elevating cybersecurity to a high-level risk approach, along with all other business risks, you've got it at board level. And if management of critical infrastructure operators neglect to introduce a sort of base level of care, they're being negligent. There's no level of due diligence. You've got better sort of awareness at board and reporting requirements. And this would not only be important for critical infrastructure operators, because as we're seeing with the recently announced preliminary NIST framework in the US, which I went through today, and it all makes a lot of sense. It's really high level and incredibly, a lot of it is very obvious. But that type of stuff, even though it's being applied to critical infrastructure operators, would permeate through all other businesses pretty quickly. And that would represent at some level, it would actually meet targets that the NIS directive does, which doesn't mean to say the directive couldn't come about in parallel. But it's just that this track could be faster. And then a directive in the future could actually reinforce that. So you could pick up elements of that and say that in certain areas this type of approach, through different incentives, is de facto almost, it's mandatory. So that's a different perspective as how this might move forward. And with that, a scheme like that is not toothless by any means. It just uses different incentives and different levers. So with that, I thank you very much, and I'd like to close and open the floor to, I don't know who's going to moderate the questions and answers, but it's not me. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pilar.